I sat on a permaculture farm in Guatemala that had a fence between it and a milpa, an ancient form of milpa, like ancient thousands of years old agroforestry system. And they were monocropping without mulch, just doing everything wrong there on that quote unquote permaculture farm. And I asked them what was going on the other side of that fence. And they're like, I don't know, these native people just come mess around, like touch leaves and just do weird stuff and don't really do anything, and then don't really leave with much food every day. I don't know what they're doing. And got talking to those people, and all of a sudden I'm learning about a thousands of years old agroforestry system that kept the Mayan Empire going through a 1,000-year drought, worse than what Western United States is going through right now.
Welcome, everyone, to Biodiversity for a Livable Climate's monthly speaker series, Life Saves the Planet. So some of you will remember our speakers from an earlier event in this series. This series is created by Biodiversity for a Livable Climate, and it is co-hosted by the WGBH Forum Network. About 8 months ago, we presented a webinar called A New Generation of Changemakers Reclaiming Ancestral Wisdom. William Wildcat Coakí and Jess Parfrey were both part of that new generation of changemakers reclaiming ancestral wisdom. And this is really another chapter, you might say, in carrying that forward. So Coakí was born in the Oklahoma Seminole Nation. He has practiced organic gardening since childhood, organic farming for much of his adult life, and regenerative horticulture, food forestry, and wildland restoration for the last decade. For Coakí, ecological restoration is a spiritual path, one that includes creating cultures that honor all species. His website, Mother Tree, Food and Forest, and other resources will be shared with you during the presentation. He's going to be joined by Jessica Alvarez Parfrey, who is the Executive Director of Transitions US. They will be in conversation, and Jess will also manage the whole question and answer period. There is much more that needs to be said about both of them. They have pretty full bios that you can look at, but I don't want to take much time with this because we have just 1 hour and there's a great deal to say. So I'm going to hand this over now to Jess, who's going to kind of frame the event, and then we will be underway. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paula. I want to also thank our friends at Biodiversity for a Livable Climate and WGBH Boston. As Paula mentioned, this is now my second time being in conversation on this platform with Coakí. We've had many other wonderful conversations, and we actually got to meet each other through the Eco Restoration Alliance, which is an amazing gathering of scientists, storytellers, and practitioners who are trying to regenerate the earth by repairing the biosphere. So as a mom, as someone who's invested in the work of creating a more regenerative and just future, learning about how we need to integrate wisdom and science for many different cultural orientations and traditions, I think is such valuable knowledge. And Coakí does such a wonderful job of breaking this down for us, because the whole point is to get our hands in the soil, on the land, planting a garden, even if that's how we're getting started. This is such critical work in the face of climate disruption, and building resilience, ensuring that we have food sovereignty and safe communities is everything. So our forests have so much to teach us. I'm really grateful to be here. And I want to pass it over to you, Coakí, because you're going to get us started with a presentation. And me, I, again, was so excited and full of joy to be invited to be in conversation with you. I have so many questions, and I'm sure our audience is going to have a lot of questions for Coakí. We also want to let folks know that Coakí is going to be answering questions that we don't get to today, and he's going to be posting them up on his website. So look out for that. So with that, I think we have one more minute. I wanted to get us grounded with some words from Robin Wald Kimmerer, who is an Indigenous researcher and educator. So Braiding Sweetgrass, if you have not read that, I highly recommend it. So action on behalf of life transforms. Because of the relationship between self and the world is reciprocal, it is not a question of first getting enlightened or saved and then acting. As we heal the earth heals us. One more. Even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy. And I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift. Okay, so it's such a gift again to be here with you all. I'm going to hand it over to you, Coakí.
Hey, my name is Coakí. I was named William Wildcat. Wildcat was a mistranslation of Coakí, the person I was named after, and Coakí is a form of that name. So I've gone back to that. There's a lot I would like to say, but I think that there are a lot of friends on here who know me, so I'm going to skip the rest of the introductions and just kind of get to this. I want to give some context for why I'm giving this talk today. And there's a lot of problems that a lot of us are facing and dealing with on the planet, that really all species are facing on the planet right now. We have climate destabilizing, and we're experiencing an extinction event, and that's really serious, and the rate of loss of biodiversity is accelerating, and the rate of destabilization of the climate is accelerating, and we're seeing things we never thought would be possible, and we're predicting things that would be terrible if they happen. And we have a lot of agency, and a lot of us don't feel like we have agency. And so this talk is to help people know their agency, help us know our power. And we can affect this a lot. And then we're also having human health epidemics, some really biological, because we don't have much nutrient densities in the foods we have access to anymore. And so there are ways we know how to create nutrient dense foods while restoring the ecosystems that we're getting our foods from. And that's powerful. And so that serves us in a lot of ways. And also we're dealing with mental health epidemics in the United States and Canada and Europe, and probably in a lot of other countries, probably anywhere techno-industrialized culture exists. There are probably significant mental health problems. And so when Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about re-indigenization, I think that means what some people mean when they say decolonization. And for me, that's all the same thing as just healing ourselves, and doing that through healing our relationships internally with ourselves, our relationships with each other, interpersonally in our families, in our communities, and especially healing our relationships in the ecosystems that we are a part of. We have this sense of being disconnected from nature, being other than or separate from nature, which is a false sense of separation, but a very detrimental one to us and to the ecosystems we're part of. So I have a little slideshow to go through today. If you will start that for me, please do. So Mother Tree Food and Forest is the name of the nonprofit that I help to run, and mothertree.earth is the website. It's just hitting presses now, so there's not a lot on there right now. In the coming year, it will be filled with resources and should become a valuable resource for agroecology and ecological restoration. Next slide, please. So there's this myth that the best we can do for nature is to leave it alone. And this myth lives in conservation biology, and it sort of permeates our society in general. Like there's this idea that humans are a cancer on the planet, and we see the destruction that humans are doing. But that idea and wording it like that, it's not true, and it's detrimental. The truth is that we are nature. You have to have this sense of separation from nature to think that you could even leave nature alone. Truth is that we are nature, and that our behaviors, our sets of behaviors have changed significantly enough to be detrimental to the ecosystems of the planet, but it's not that we are inherently detrimental. So how do we change our behaviors back? Next slide, please. how do we change our behaviors back? And what we see is that we're a powerful steward species. This is a forest, a very young forest, probably 4 to 10 years old behind this man here, that human beings planted. So this is the Miyawaki reforestation method. This forest was triggered by a set of human behaviors. Human beings are a powerful steward species, much like beavers and wolves, who can affect ecosystems dramatically with their behaviors. And so what are we doing with our behaviors? That's what determines whether our presence is detrimental or beneficial to the ecosystems. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of ancient and modern technologies, both agroforestry and reforestation, ecological restoration technologies, which prove that we can do a lot better than leaving it alone. The ancient form of milpa is one, which is thousands of years old. It's a thousands of years old applied science, which has had ample time to work out all the kinks, and it's powerful. It yields super nutrient dense foods while restoring the ecosystem, preserving and benefiting surrounding ecosystems, and it promotes biodiversity. You get unbelievable biodiversity in a very small area. And of course, they're taking advantage of biodiversity. It would not be regenerative agriculture if biodiversity were not a key element in it. And it's a form of agroforestry. And agroforestry are agricultural systems that include trees and shrubs in them. So syntropic agriculture or agroforestry, syntropic farming or syntropic gardening, you can call it a lot of different things. It's a technology that comes out of Brazil that is a mix of indigenous agroforestry technology and modern ecological knowledge, modern Western science, ecology, wisdom. And it's a really powerful system that is easy to teach people in the techno-industrial culture and mindset. So it's something that we can learn. The ancient form of milpa has about a 30-year cycle, and it's a thousands of years old technology that people get born into intergenerationally. And so you get 3 cycles if you live a long lifetime. And so you become, you begin gaining some mastery in it, at the end of a long lifetime. So it's not easy to teach. Syntropic agroforestry is teachable. And so it's powerful. It's a powerful way to incorporate trees and shrubs in your agricultural system, growing your annual crops with it, and really focuses on management. It's not an input-driven system. It's a management-driven system. And so it is really, really powerful at restoring ecology and creating an abundance of nutrient-dense foods and a diversity of them as well. Miyawaki reforestation, as I just spoke to, is a really powerful system of reforestation created by a Japanese ecologist maybe botanist named Dr. Akira Miyawaki. Biodiversity for a Livable Climate involves himself in Miyawaki reforestation projects. There's some amazing people like Maya Duda on that team doing amazing work. And I really appreciate and respect them a lot. And there are people who've already spoken, like Hannah Lewis has spoken on this forum, the series about that. And so you can see her video. And there's a lot more to explore through the WGBH forum and Biodiversity for a Livable Climate if you have interest in Miyawaki reforestation. And I'll share a lot of knowledge about that on the website this year. So pay attention to us as well if you're interested in that. I'm going to speak more today about syntropic agroforestry, and I'll come back to that. So there's a really important idea that a lot of us are missing in the conversation about ecology and ecological restoration. And that idea is that the behavior of animals have a physical, chemical, and biological impact on the environment that the animal is behaving in. So the behavior of animals in general have always been integral parts of the coevolution of every ecosystem on the planet. And so it's not merely the presence of the animal, it's the set of behaviors. And of course, culture affects behaviors. The same species of animal can have different cultures. There are certain groups of timber wolves that swim miles out to islands off the coast of British Columbia to hunt out there, whereas most groups of timber wolves don't, and so they have a different ecological impact because their culture is different. All animals have culture. Culture affects behaviors, and behaviors have impact on the functionality of ecosystems. And that's really, really important. And, there are harvest-dependent plant species as well that show us, and this is all speaking to the fact that leaving nature alone is not the answer. So Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about harvest-dependent species like sweetgrass, inbreeding sweetgrass. Gabe Crawford in Colorado speaks about the wild mountain carrot, which is going away in the Rocky Mountains because humans are no longer harvesting it. There are a lot of plant species. I mean, ecosystems co-evolved with all of the animals and all of their behaviors. And so there are a lot of species that are absolutely dependent upon our presence and our participation in ecological systems for their survival. And so the extreme opposite of us needing to leave it alone is what's true. Next slide, please. Why focus on trees? Why my focus on trees? Why am I asking you to focus on trees? There are a lot of reasons. Global climate is a big one. We know from biotic pump dynamics, which Anastasia Markarieva explains very clearly, and I've linked a couple of her talks about this on the resources list at the bottom of the page that you access this through. She is brilliant and a very good communicator, and she explains very clearly how forests cool the surface of the earth. And it's all very simple physics. You know, plant transpiration, plants release water vapor out of their leaves, and when that water turns from liquid to vapor as it's leaving the leaf, it absorbs thermal energy in the atmosphere. When it condenses into clouds, that thermal energy is released, much of it in the form of infrared radiation, which leaves the planet. Thermal energy, heat from the surface of the planet, released as infrared out into space because of transpiration of plants, because of trees breathing. That's biotic pump. Forests, a tree cools the area around it. Forests are cooler than the area around it. If you plant a Milwaukee forest in the city, you have 10, 15 degree cooler area, 20 degree cooler area even than the surrounding city. So you cool off cities by planting these mini forests. Trees cool the earth. Forests are the air conditioning system for the earth. So we've cut down all the trees on the planet. That's hyperbole. We've cut down, we've cleared many of the forests, much of the forest from this planet. And so surface temperature is rising. We're in a cooling phase of the ice age, which is this 100,000 year long cycle of glaciers waxing and waning, waxing and waning. We've been through many of these cycles as a species. We've been through a few of these cycles as a species. We've been through many as hominids. And we're in a cooling period. The glaciers should be coming back right now, but they're disappearing at an accelerating rate because the temperature of the earth is increasing because we've cut down so many forests. And so we need to reforest the planet. So global climate, also forests regulate rainfall patterns, the global hydrologic cycle, and that's very important too. When we have forests, we have frequent light rain events, which is very beneficial for life. When we don't have forests, we have fewer rain events that are much heavier, much more intense when they do happen. So you deforest, you remove all the cover that would prevent erosion, and then the result of the deforestation is much more large, intense rain events that are really, really eroding and taking all the rest of the organic matter and everything off into the oceans. And so for global hydrologic cycles and thermal regulation, temperature regulation on the planet, we need to reforest the planet. Mitigating this extinction event is another reason. Deciduous forests have the most biodiversity of any type of ecosystem in temperate zones, more than, if you go backwards in ecological succession, they have more than savannas, more than grasslands, more than desert. And they do so because they're syntropic systems. They have accumulated a lot of energy and a lot of structure. And so you have all of these different habitats and all of these forms of energy and all of these different types of nutrients to allow speciation. So you have more space being held for speciation. And so that's why you have the most biodiversity in deciduous forests out of all the forms of ecosystems that can exist in temperate zones. And so forests, they allow biodiversity. They allow more biodiversity than other types of ecosystems. So there are other types of ecological restoration we can do besides reforestation, but reforestation is the powerful form. And that's the form that affects global climate the most favorably. That's the form that mitigates this extinction event we're in the most. And so very important for those two reasons. Also, human needs. When we return to our ancestral habits, practices of including trees in our agricultural systems, we create these systems that are resilient, abundant, beneficial to the ecosystems around them, and which create nutrient-dense foods. And so we have a health crisis on this planet. We're now saying 5% of the nutrient density that we used to get in the foods we eat. and in the same food grown in the same land 100 years ago would have 20 times as much nutrient density. We don't have a calorie deficiency anywhere in this country, in the United States. We do have a nutrient deficiency issue all over this country. And so including trees and shrubs is a powerful way to kickstart, and growing biodiverse polyculture is how you do that. And then when you bring trees and shrubs into those systems, then you create powerful, resilient systems, and you just amplify the effects. Next slide, please. Yes, so reforestation and agroforestry. Reforestation for climate ecology, agroforestry for human needs. Next slide, please. Yeah, so similar things like including trees in all of these systems. And so there are a few technologies that I'd like to speak on that have some brand names. 3 of those are Syntropic agroforestry, that powerful form of agriculture out of Brazil that mixes trees and shrubs with your annual crops. Food forestry, which in my mind is the most important. And that's not what this talk is about today, but I really want you to make a note of this. We are a foraging species. So when we're talking about the ecological effects of animal behavior, when we moved away from foraging, the ecological impact of our behaviors became destructive to this planet. And so, a lot of people say it's when agriculture began, or it's when monocropping began, or I heard John Luce suggest that it might have been when tool technologies changed so we could hunt in more destructive ways, that the great deserts of the world began. And so there are different theories about that, but we're certain that it was when we moved away from foraging, or at least from really, really coherent agroforestry. So food forestry, creating perennial gardens that just keep feeding you, a lot of work up front, and then you get to just receive free food with small amounts of maintenance after that. That way we get to live the way we evolved to live. And when we put ourselves in an environment that reflects the environment that we evolved in, then we get the chance at epigenetic actualization. So then we get a chance to see all of our capacities come online. We get the chance to see our children blossom into their fullest genetic potential. And so there's every reason in the world for food forestry. It relieves us of all the work we have to do to just fulfill basic needs. We did not evolve to farm, and farming is very hard work. We evolved to forage. We are a foraging species. So food forestry makes all the sense in the world. There are brilliant people like Jeff Lawton who have endless hours of information, videos, interviews, podcasts. Food forestry is powerful. It's where it's at. We should be food foresting around our Syntropic agroforestry agricultural sites. And then Miyawaki reforestation is just one really powerful form of reforestation that we have a lot to learn from. It's energy, money, and time demanding. So it's not suitable for large-scale reforestation of the planet, but there's a lot of valuable knowledge within that algorithm that we can take, that we can then apply to make large-scale reforestation more effective. And then we can figure out, we can adapt it to make it more time, money, and labor efficient so that we can do large-scale reforestation. Next slide, please. So, I'm going to focus on Syntropic agroforestry today. Quick overview of what it is. It's a regenerative agriculture system which combines trees and shrubs with annual crops. And you also have biomass accumulator rows in there, whole rows of plants. So you have north-south rows because sun goes east to west, so your annual crops can get some sun when the trees get tall. North-south rows of trees and shrubs, biomass accumulator plants that you're just growing to mulch with. You're just growing that to feed the earth there. So it's not this full extraction, maximize profit off of mother strategy, which is ecologically destructive, psychologically, emotionally destructive, culturally destructive. It is a lower extraction situation where you're thinking about this meta-organism and you're really, really focusing on the health of that system and on working with that system. So it is a management-driven system as opposed to an input-driven system. In modern industrial agriculture, and even in this, what we call organic agriculture here in this country, and especially commercial organic agriculture, we've just adapted this business as usual input-driven system. The source of the salts, basically the poisons that we're putting in these systems that are keeping soil biology from thriving. And so these systems are, what we call organic agriculture here is an insufficient standard for human health. It's an insufficient standard for ecological health, and that's because it's still an input-driven system. So in syntropic agroforestry, you have a management-driven system, which looks at pruning and planting strategies and just takes advantage of, it leverages all of these ecological botany, plant physiology, soil ecology concepts to maximize the rates of accumulation of organic matter, to increase the rate of the nutrient cycling so things are most nutrient dense most quickly. And it just does that. It accelerates land through ecological succession very quickly because it's a very well designed system. It works with natural systems instead of against them, so it's a lot easier. You get a lot more for the work that you put in than you do in an industrial agriculture, even what we call organic agriculture in this country. And it includes a knowledge of ecological succession and on just plant life cycle succession. And please come to one of my workshops to learn more about that. It creates nutrient-dense foods, which is beneficial for everybody, including all of the other beings who are not human beings who are eating from that system. And we're not fighting anybody. It's completely regenerative. So super biodiverse polyculture, there's no type of fertilization, any synthetic chemicals being put on this at all. So all the insects, the birds, the snakes, the rodents, everybody is sharing, and you're sharing on purpose. And a lot of the plants you're growing in syntropic agriculture are not for human food. Like those biomass accumulator rows are specifically just food for microbes and soil and insects and birds and whoever else wants them. Syntropic agroforestry can create resilient food forests if that's your aim with this, and it can be adaptable to a lot of different human needs. So depending on where you live, are you growing for subsistence? Are you growing for market? Are you growing for, what is your cash crop? Are they tree crops? Are they annual crops? Are you growing for medicine? Is this a medicine garden? Is this an ethnobotany garden? This can be adapted to ethnobotany, to herbalism. I mean, whatever your needs are, this is a powerful way to accomplish those needs, and guaranteed, this is a powerful way to get the most medicine and the most nutrient out of those same plants. It restores soil, benefits the ecology around it in a lot of ways. It creates food security because you're growing biodiverse polyculture and you're getting nutrient-dense foods, and you're creating a resilient system that is not going to be affected by droughts, insects, blights, things like this. And the biodiversity itself is the immune system of that system. And so it creates food security in a lot of ways. It helps preserve local cultures by creating food security and by allowing all of the medicines and all of the plants that people have relationships with back into those agricultural systems. And so there's a place to preserve all of the spiritual relations that people have with plants. And so that's powerful. This is a way to preserve indigenous cultures, which are threatened around the world, or just small local culture, even if they don't identify as indigenous, small cultures that are being threatened by globalization and by the homogenization of markets that these mega corporations talk about, which means like genocide, like just homogenizing world culture, and so this helps protect us from that. And that's a big deal. It improves local economies in a lot of ways. You can create ecosystems in your climate that all of your neighbors, everybody around you believes is impossible. You can do it using syntropic agriculture. And so now you can grow products for market that nobody in your region can grow. And so now you are the only person who can grow this thing. And so, and then your family, and then your community, and then whoever gets into it, you can start taking care of all of your own needs better. So there's less draw externally for external inputs. You can start providing for all of your needs: food, fiber, medicine, dyes, woods. You name it, you can really start providing for your own needs. And so there are multiple ways in which it improves local economies and makes people more economically secure. It improves local health in all of the ways I've mentioned so far. Next slide, please. And so that's ecological health, that's human health. It's the health of all beings. Next slide, please. The elements of syntropic agroforestry. Biodiverse polyculture includes trees, shrubs, grasses, and forbs. Planting densely, planting plants close together. And so this contradicts the competition lens that we're enculturated into in this culture. It's really important to speak on it because we're taught that plants are competing for water, they're competing for light, they're competing for nutrients. We see the exact opposite. We see this unbelievable system of mutualism, just layers and layers of mutualism. Suzanne Simard, she speaks to that in the work that she does. She's shown fungal networks. A lot of people have shown mycorrhizal networks communicating and transporting resources between not just two trees of the same species, but just different plant species. And different fungal species can connect with each other. And so even if you don't have a direct fungal partner with this plant of another species, you have a common community that can transport information and nutrients. And we see that, and we know that that's true. And so we plant densely. Miyawaki does that, and there's no failed Miyawaki forest on this planet that was planted true to that algorithm. And so there are Miyawaki forests in deserts that are planted densely. And so they succeed because they're planted densely. So we see that it's not competition here. This is really complex mutualism. So syntropic agroforestry, so it plants densely on area, ground, floor plan. It also plants densely vertically. So you're filling in all the canopy strata with different plants, and some are short plants, some are very short plants, some are medium, some are tall, some are emergent, and you're filling the whole canopy strata. And as you get taller, you get a little bit less planting density, so that you get some, a bunch of light on the tall ones, you get some light on the medium ones, and you get a little bit of light on the small ones, because these beings all evolved in these types of ecosystems. All trees and shrubs, for sure, are forest species. All of the annual crops that we grow, most of them are forest clearing species. So they're going to thrive. They're going to be most healthy in a forest soil ecology, and they're going to be most healthy not with 12 hours of sunlight. Where I'm at right now, about 2,600 feet. Plants don't want, most annual crops don't want 12 hours of full sunlight. They'd like a few hours of full sunlight, a bunch of mottled light. You see, that's why, a tree nursery is just a shade structure, and everything, a nursery for any plants, little baby plants, everybody grows healthier. And you're not going to start your tomatoes in full sun. You're going to start them in partial sun and shade, and they're going to grow more quickly, and they're going to be healthier. And so that's because all of these beings evolved to be born underneath canopy, and as they grow, get more and more light until they arrive and they can fill themselves out in whatever strata they've evolved or they prefer in that lifetime to fill in. And so they can actually they can self-regulate in a dense canopy. Plants can get exactly where they want to be and can self-regulate that way, so they can be more healthy when they have those options, that gradient of different amount of lights. So we fill canopy strata in syntropic agriculture. Successional planting strategies. So you're thinking about ecological succession. Year 4, you're planting a different guild than you're planting year 1. And because you're thinking about ecological succession, where we are, who this organism is now, this meta-organism, which is the whole ecosystem, which is making decisions for itself as a whole organism, rather than as individual parts, the way your cells, your body, the tissues, the organs in your body, our body makes decisions for the best good of the whole organism, rather than for those individual cells or tissues. Same deal. So we're thinking about ecological succession. It's also a successional form of agriculture, agroecology, in the sense of plant succession. So you fill in all the canopy strata, you fill in the area, and then this plant, but you're thinking about how their life cycles and when you harvest and what you're harvesting. So when it's time to take this plant out to harvest this plant, that next plant that's going to take its place is already there and ready. And so you take that plant out and that one just fills in immediately. So there are these complex planting strategies that are really intensive compared to the way we're doing agriculture here. So it's a learning curve for people who are used to farming in this country, but we could not do worse than the way we've been farming in this country. We've destroyed the ecology of this entire continent doing farming the way we do it in this country. And that includes what we call organic farming, which is business as usual farming, which is a different source of the poison we're putting in to kill the soil biology. And so, successional, it's a little bit more thought. There's a lot of thought that goes into the planting strategies, but with practice, it becomes easy. It's just a lot to think about at first. Low extraction rates, again, you have, there's no dirt on the planet that is missing anything we need. We just need the microbes to make those nutrients available. And so they can only make so many nutrients available per unit time. If you're doing full extraction, they can't keep up. The microbes can't keep up with what you're taking. So if you do a lower extraction, if you're extracting less than they're bringing into the nutrient cycling system, then you are building. Then that's syntropic. Syntropy as opposed to entropy. Entropy is losing energy, losing structure out of a system. Syntropy is building energy and building structure in a system. So we start out with lower extraction rates, and as the energy and the structure of that system builds and it becomes 4 times more productive, 16 times more productive, then we're increasing our extraction rates, and we might cap at 40 or 60% extraction of a system that's 4 times more abundant. So we're getting more food than we would be getting doing 100% extraction rate ever, because you're just going to keep it at a minimum. The productivity, you keep that at a minimum by doing maximum extraction rate. So you can keep your extraction rate low and still end up receiving more from it because you're doing that. There's complex management to accumulate organic matter above and below ground more quickly. I'd love to share more about that with you at some point. Please, watch that website. And the concept of the meta-organism. We're always thinking about the meta-organism so we understand these systems better. It took me a while to get my mind state out of the individual. This plant, what does this plant need? What's going on with this plant? What's going on by that plant? I'm back and forth. I still have to stop sometimes and refocus to think about the meta-organism and look at this whole system as one being. And when we do that, what we see is not competition, but co-determination of what's in that organism's best interest in terms of resource management, energy management, getting the shade, the canopy structure the way it needs, all of that. So the concept of meta-organism is a really important concept also. Next slide, please. The canopy stratification, I think I kind of already talked about this. When you fill that volume vertically, you get more photosynthesis in that volume. So you maximize what we call ecological productivity, which is the amount of sugars, the amount of calories being converted from sun energy into chemical energy per area, per unit time. So you get more chemical energy, more nutrients, more calories, however you want to measure, but more soil built, more life structure in the same amount of time when you fill in those canopy strata. So that's more food for more beings. You get more habitat for more beings. You're encouraging biodiversity. There are beings that don't live on the earth. They only live up in the canopy. Small water cycle. This is really important. When we fill in those canopy strata, we increase the amount of transpiration, and that does multiple things for us on the surface. It fuels us, what we call the small water cycle. So you have everybody transpiring. It's very humid. So the earth, the water near the surface of the earth, it can't evaporate because there's too much water pressure in the air. So it stays there. So water's not evaporating from the surface. At nighttime, everything's condensing and falling. When I arrived here, I'm in Southern California right now. When I arrived here a couple of nights ago, I arrived at nighttime in an oak forest out in the mountains, and there were fog, there was clouds everywhere, and it was raining underneath the trees. It was not raining from the sky. It was raining underneath the trees because the fog was condensing on the trees. Plants are what we call fog nets. You have people talking about, we don't need any more products. Mother Earth does not need products. Human beings don't need products. Everything that we need has existed for 100,000 years. If somebody's trying to sell you a product, they either don't know what they're doing or they're trying to take you. We don't need more products. People talk about creating fog nets. We have fog nets. It's called grass. It's trees. The water was condensing on the trees, and it was raining underneath the trees. When I arrived here, it was so beautiful. I'd never seen that before. It was raining. Water was, because there was so much humidity moving through that it was just condensing and falling. So wherever there was a tree, it was raining underneath the trees. Small water cycle. Trees bring water in multiple ways. Anastasia Markarieva can explain that in a lot of ways. I can explain it in more ways, in additional ways. Trees bring water. Trees hold water, keep water there. We fill in those canopy strata. We get the most water staying in what I call the local water economy. It's like local economy. You buy local, that dollar stays there and keeps cycling. And so we fill in the canopy strata. We fill in the local water economy. We do dense canopy stratification for maximum plant health, for biotic pump, same deal, more transpiration, more biotic pump effect, the cooler the Earth's surface, diverse habitat for biodiversity. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Andrew. Thank you. So plant trees. I'm asking everybody, please plant trees. There's a program that I am supporting called OTE, 100 trees a year. We're asking every person on the planet please make space to hear this request. We're asking every person on the planet to plant, to commit to, and not commit to me, don't commit to anybody, commit to yourself. We're asking you to commit to yourself to plant 100 trees a year for the rest of your life, and also to let everybody else you know, and to make that request of them. And so if that sounds like a lot to you right now, please just make space for that and begin looking in time, take your time with it, and begin looking at how you could begin transitioning into that. You know, maybe you could build a tree nursery and let other people run it. Or maybe you could give your backyard to some people, some young person in your community who has a lot of energy who'd be willing to run a tree nursery in your backyard. Or maybe you hike a lot and you can collect tree seeds and give them to somebody who has a lot of energy. So begin, please, looking at how you could become involved. And it's really simple and easy, and it feels really good. So in time, it's easy to transition into this. And so we're asking everybody to commit to planting 100 trees a year, and to ask, making that request of everybody else they know. This is a beautiful movement and it feels good. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so some of the concepts I'd like you all to leave with, and please visit mothertree.earth. Multiple times over the next years, I keep developing it. It will become a more useful resource so you can learn more about all of these ideas. And you're always welcome to contact me through that site. You're always welcome to contact me in person, wildcatgaia@gmail.com. And I'm happy to be a resource for anybody who is interested in being beneficial to the ecology of the planet and to human health and human sovereignty. So some ideas I'd like to leave you with are that we are a part of nature. We're a foraging species. Food forestry is the best way we can feed ourselves. Syntropic agriculture is a powerful, powerful way also. Our behaviors determine our effects on ecosystems. And really what that means is, so it's not just the climate. So we have this idea that climate determines the type of ecosystem that is there. Not true at all. The sets of animal behaviors within that climate are, in addition to the specific biodiversity of what plant species are there and what animal species are there, in time, because you leave that same set of plants with that same set of animals behaving the same way for time now, and it's going to move through ecological succession and then stabilize somewhere. And then there will be an event that will change that, and it restabilizes and change and restabilize. So climate, animal behavior, specific biodiversity, and time determine ecosystem. It's not just the climate. Restoring healthy relations in nature is our healing. That's indigenization. Restoring our relationships with the forest is our healing. That's how we heal our cultural problems, our political problems, our economic problems, my emotional problems, my psychological, my physiological, my health issues. That's how I heal myself, is by restoring healthy relationships with the ecosystems that I am a part of. Climate, biodiversity, time, yep, just spoke to that. Reforesting the planet to stabilize climate and ecology. That's the game plan. A lot more powerful than creating more effective grasslands through regenerative grazing. Much more powerful, much more beneficial than regenerative grazing is reforesting the planet. Including trees in our agricultural systems is just vital for human health and ecology. Think meta-organism. Take your time with that, but really think meta-organism. It will help explain so much that we don't understand about what's happening around us. Plant trees, plant trees, plant trees, and please consider planting 100 trees a year. I love and appreciate you all very much. Thank you for helping me with the slideshow.
I'm always just blown away by your passion and just the depth of knowledge that you carry. And I think it's because you also recognize just how critical, and you've named this a few times, just how critical these technologies are for helping us to weather through these times, but to also thrive. Imagine that we're able to thrive and create the abundance and the well-being that we need amidst some of the greatest, most complex challenges that we've ever faced as a species. So I think that's what really brings me hope. I'm really excited to be attending your workshop this weekend, and I'll get a more in-depth view. But again, like reminding folks, like easy ways to get started: plant a garden, create green space. I think this meta-organism concept is really beautiful for looking at how we might interact at a particular scale, the scale of the life place or the bioregion. So how do we forge kinship with our watersheds, with our forests. And again, taking this knowledge forward, like share it. And what I heard a lot about with regards to these subtle but important distinctions between syntropic agriculture, agroforestry, food forestry is like, these are different cultural lineages and different orientations in terms of the science that we're doing. But weaving these strategies together, I think, is our best bet. At least that's what it sounds like to me, is taking a very kind of holistic, syncretic approach to the way that we do this kind of work and experimenting, really finding the joy in doing this experiential learning work. Yeah. Anyway, that's my reflection. But I wanted to also bring forward some of the wonderful questions. One of the wonderful questions that we got sent in ahead of time. So the question here is, what is the relation between permaculture and these ancient practices? I also want to bring up traditional ecological knowledge. If you could maybe tell us a little bit more about the distinction there.
Yeah, my comprehension. So permaculture comes from Australia. And a lot of people say that it was informed by traditional ecological knowledge in Australia, though it did not get that credit for that. And there are some people who have taken it in really beautiful directions, and some people who don't have much comprehension with it. And so I've seen it practiced in ways that are a lot better than what we call just regular organic farming. And I've seen it practiced in really mindless ways that, I said on a permaculture farm in Guatemala that had a fence between it and a milpa, an ancient form of milpa, like ancient thousands of years old agroforestry system. And they were monocropping without mulch, just doing everything wrong there on that quote unquote permaculture farm. And I asked them what was going on the other side of that fence. And they're like, I don't know, these native people just come mess around, like touch leaves and just do weird stuff and don't really do anything, and then don't really leave with much food every day. I don't know what they're doing. And got talking to those people, and all of a sudden I'm learning about a thousands of years old agroforestry system that kept the Mayan Empire going through a 1,000-year drought, worse than what Western United States is going through right now. And so I think permaculture is a potentially very powerful way to introduce people who have lost relationship with the forest, lost relationship with nature. It's a wonderful, beautiful way to introduce them getting back into relationships. There's a lot of common sense that's really beautiful. And they're like, the place you're going to work the most, have that closest to your home, just beautiful comprehension like that. And, but doesn't necessarily, and then it depends on the comprehension of the person bringing it, Starhawk teaches PDCs out in Northern California, and she brings some beautiful comprehension with that. And so it varies a whole lot. I think it's a structure that you can bring as much or as little into as you want that directs people. It's a wonderful introduction into relationship with nature, but it does not necessarily have any of the really advanced science that traditional ecological knowledge has, or that these modern forms like Miyawaki and Syntropic agriculture have. It's sad, poorly, like desperately missing and needing those influences to come into it now.
We have so many great questions here. And again, Coakí is going to be following up in response, but I have one here from Elodie. How do you imagine a system like syntropic agroforestry happening on a large scale that creates right livelihood? I'm really interested in that question too.
That's a wonderful question. So in multiple places in Africa and Brazil right now, this technology is from Brazil. There are mega corporate, like big farms, big money operations who have adapted to syntropic agriculture, agroforestry, there's machinery being developed to do this at scale. And I've not gone to study at any of those sites yet. So I can't speak to the specific adaptations that make it. This is designed for small farmers. This is a small farmer system to protect small farmers, which is a lifestyle that is healthy to human beings. Mega corporate farming is not healthy to human beings. And so we're sacrificing a whole lot. And what I've heard from firsthand accounts of people who know syntropic agriculture, who have helped set up these systems, visited these systems, what I'm hearing is that there's a lot sacrificed in terms of ecological and human health when we scale it up. And so this, by decentralizing food systems and food networks, we we empower ourselves. We protect ourselves. We empower and protect the ecosystems that we're a part of. So we don't want to scale up. We want to scale down. We want to decentralize all food systems. All the food that feeds New York City should be grown as close to New York City as possible. It's 14,000 acres of suitable rooftops in New York City for growing food that's not being used. So we're not aiming to scale anything up. We're aiming to decentralize, the exact opposite. And it is scalable. I can't speak to the specific adaptations or anything I can, but yeah. In time, ask me again when you see me.
So there's a great question here from Judith. So what is a milpa? If you were to describe kind of that system, what is a milpa?
Thank you for asking. I wish I would have remembered to include that. The ancient form of milpa. When you say milpa in Mexico, that just means my garden. If there's corn in it, that's a milpa. But that's not what milpa is. The ancient form of milpa that only a few people in southernmost part of Chiapas and a little bit of Guatemala remember. The ancient form of milpa, which is still remembered. It hasn't been destroyed yet, and it will hopefully return, is this beautiful system that begins with slash and burn of a little patch of forest. And so, but that's where it begins. And then you move ecological succession all the way back to grassland, and you start growing your corn, beans, and squash, all those forest clearing species. And then you grow super biodiverse polyculture. You grow 60 species together, and then another 60 species volunteer, including early successional tree species. And so for 2, 3, 4 years, you're growing similar things, but then every year, the ecology is changing a little bit. So you keep planting different seeds. And eventually, some seeds you were planting before, you're not planting anymore. And so after 4 years, it's ecologically different enough, and all those trees that have volunteered are now tall enough that corn, beans, and squash are not thriving anymore. And so now you clear cut a second section adjacent. And so now you've got these 2 stages of ecological succession. And so now you have this diversity of plant species you can grow, because you're growing all these species in the first one that you can't grow in the second, and vice versa. And so 4 years later, another, 4 years later, another. It's about a 32-year cycle, 8 adjacent plots staggered in ecological succession, so that these seed keepers who have thousands of seeds, that they know when and where to plant in what stages of ecological succession. This is an advanced science. These seed keepers are able to grow. And then you have all of the volunteers also that just grow wild, self-propagate in those systems. And so you have thousands of species. You have in 8 adjacent plots staggered in ecological succession, all within walking distance of where you're staying. You have every hyperbole. You have a humongous fraction of all of the plants for all of the foods, fiber, fuel, medicine, dye, wood, whatever, that could possibly grow in any type of ecosystem that could exist in your climate. And the ancient form of milpa proves to us that climate does not determine ecosystem. They have 8 completely different ecosystems adjacent to each other right there in one spot. So that proves that our behavior and climate and the specific list of species determines the ecosystem. And so it's an incredibly advanced, incredibly powerful technology that the Mayan Empire used to the Quetzalcoatl civilization, this great civilization that was a spiritual, philosophical, music, art, ecological, like learning, evolution, culture for thousands of years. And now anthropologists coming out last couple of years saying egalitarian culture for thousands of years. They used milpa, this ancient form of agroforestry, to keep not just their civilization going through that 1,000-year drought they went through, but to keep rainforest species. And the pollen and rainfall records show that there are rainforest species that they maintained through a drought longer and worse than what we're going through in the US Southwest right now. It's amazing, amazing stuff. Thank you for asking.
Mind-blowing. And again, just like, it's really powerful to remind ourselves that here in the United States, we have less than 90%. Over 90% of our forests are completely gone. So there's a lot of work to be done. So again, going back to that point about right livelihood, really finding ways to mobilize ourselves as neighbors, as community members, as part of municipalities, engaging again with the scale of the bioregion, I think is a really powerful exercise. and finding these strategies that we can employ. And again, I think it's really humbling to remind ourselves that these are sciences that have been perfected over thousands and thousands of years, place-based cultures, indigenous science, again, indigenous technologies, I think are really at the core here. And remind ourselves that the Amazon is a food forest. So I think there was a question about what humans' role in all of this. And like Coakí was saying, our role is to be involved and to remember relationship and to seed regenerative cultures and practices that keep us fed and keep our communities, and that includes the beyond human relatives as well, thriving. So we have 3 minutes left. Again, we have so many questions that came in. Thank you all for being with us. But I want to know, Coakí, if there's any other kind of last thoughts or just takeaways that you'd like to leave folks with. And again, just thank you for everyone for being with us this evening.
Yeah, I really appreciate you, Jessica, for your participation, your contribution to this. Really, really appreciate you. I appreciate Biodiversity for a Livable Climate, and WGBH Forum for hosting. There's a lot I would love to say. If I had another hour, I would love to talk. And really, that piece that you just brought in about, we see all of the climates, all of the ecosystems in North America and South America, piece by piece, we learned how the indigenous people in that part of the world remember creating that ecosystem and how they maintained it. And the genocides have disconnected a lot of our peoples from a lot of those technologies. And so now the ecosystems have fallen apart. And it's just the part of the white supremacy that we're suffering from, this Western academic narrative that we invented technology recently in Europe and science and everything, and then everybody else is just hanging out doing whatever. But the truth is that we're seeing all over the world is that there are thousands of years old advanced sciences everywhere that have created and maintained super resilient, super biodiverse ecosystems on continental scale. And so now we're in this moment that we should be preserving and learning as many of these as possible, and then returning to active land stewardship in ways that are beneficial to the ecology, taking the lessons from our indigenous brothers and sisters around the world, relationships like keeping what is sacred in our focus, in the center of our decision-making processes. Lessons like keeping everything relational. These lessons we get from our indigenous brothers and sisters can guide us in our indigenization, our re-indigenization, and in returning back to healthy relations that are beneficial to the ecosystems that we're a part of. And again, I'll put all the answers to all the questions that weren't answered today on the website, mothertree.earth, sometime in the next week or two. Be patient with me, but if you check back, I will answer your questions. I really appreciate everybody's interest, people who came to listen to this, and people who are supporting me, supporting the nonprofit. Mother Tree Food and Forest is the name of the nonprofit. There's been so much support, so much love. I really appreciate everybody's interest and willingness, and we've got big, very good work to do ahead of us as a species, and I'm so happy to see so many people so active and doing it, including everybody involved in this. Thank you all very much.
Again, thank you all for being with us. It's been a pleasure.